They said I was too independent, like that was a flaw after everything I did. My name is Thomas Reddick. I'm 46 years old, and I gave 12 years of my life to a company that treated me like a replaceable part in a broken machine. I started at Larkin Systems back in 2011 when we were just a modest team crammed into two rented office suites. I was hired as a systems analyst, but within a year I was leading infrastructure upgrades, mentoring new hires, and doing the work of two departments. I never waited for approval. I saw what needed fixing, and I fixed it. That's how we stayed ahead. That's how we survived. But as the company grew, so did the egos. New execs came in, flashy suits, big talk, empty results. They didn't like that I didn't loop them in on every tiny decision. They wanted meetings, politics, applause. I gave them efficiency and results instead. I was told during my final performance review, where I expected a promotion, that I was a lone wolf and not aligned with the collaborative spirit of our future. That's how they worded it. Then, 3 days later, I was escorted out. No farewell, no warning, just a cold corporate smile and a signed termination letter. 12 years, gone in 7 minutes. At first, I felt crushed. I kept replaying their words over and over. Too independent. Was that their excuse for cutting the one person who always delivered? But then, I started thinking. I knew where the weak points were. Systems I'd patched temporarily, departments I'd shielded from falling apart. I didn't sabotage them. I didn't need to. I just let go. 17 days after my departure, I got a call. Their servers had crashed, twice. A security hole I warned them about, ignored. A junior analyst panicked and deleted a batch of client data. The company's largest contract was pulled. And guess who they tried calling for help? I let it ring. It turns out being too independent just meant I didn't need them. But now, they needed me more than ever. And I wasn't coming back. The calls kept coming for 2 more days. First, it was HR, trying to smooth things over, offering me a temporary consulting contract. Then it was the CTO, suddenly remembering how valuable I'd been. They dangled promises, double my old salary, complete autonomy, even equity. But I wasn't the same Thomas Reddick anymore. They hadn't just fired me, they'd shown me how little I actually needed them. And the best part? Word got around. The tech community is tighter than people think. A few whispers at the right time, a couple of facts shared over coffee with the right people, and suddenly their image of being a forward-thinking, innovative company didn't quite hold up. Stories started leaking about the crash, the cover-ups, the lost contract. Clients got nervous. Investors started asking questions. Meanwhile, I was already in talks with a competitor. Not just any competitor, a company that had been chasing Larkon's tail for years. They saw what I brought to the table. No ego, no theatrics. They made me an offer to build my own team, lead my own division. No corporate politics. Full control. And this time, I made sure the contract protected me. The best revenge wasn't just walking away. It was watching them stumble while I built something better, faster, cleaner, smarter, without them. 6 months later, I saw the news. Larkon laid off 40% of their workforce. Stock price tanked. Their golden executives quietly stepped down. And I was too busy leading a product launch to even care. They said I was too independent. Turns out that was the only thing holding them together. A year after they fired me, I was standing on the main stage at the Global Tech Innovators Conference. Not in the audience, on the stage. Our team, my team, had just unveiled a new AI-driven logistics platform that slashed operational costs by nearly 40% for mid-sized firms. Within hours, industry analysts were calling it a category-defining breakthrough. I watched the live broadcast as the headlines rolled in, my name attached to each one. And then, almost poetically, Larkan's name popped up. A massive data breach. Customer info leaked. Poor security protocols. Their CFO tried to pin it on a junior engineer, But the world had already stopped buying their excuses. They had burned bridges, cut corners, and fired the one guy who warned them about their fragile systems. I didn't celebrate, not publicly. But when I got home that night, I opened a bottle of the 18-year-old Lagavulin I'd been saving since grad school. I poured a glass, sat on the balcony, and watched the city lights flicker. That was the moment it hit me. They thought they'd ended my story. They didn't realize. They were just the plot twist. 3 months after that night on the balcony, everything had changed. Investors who once wouldn't return my calls were now asking for meetings. No, begging for meetings. Startups and Fortune 500s alike wanted to license our system. And within weeks, we had closed deals that catapulted our valuation into the 9-figure range. Meanwhile, Larkane was unraveling. Their top executives were subpoenaed. Shareholders demanded an internal investigation, and quietly, almost pathetically, they started reaching out to people they'd once discarded. Even me. It was a Thursday morning when I got the message. "Hey, Thomas, we'd love to have a conversation. There's a lot of value in your expertise, and we believe there's a path to reconciliation." Reconciliation? I stared at that word for a long. This was the same company that threw me out without a warning, branded me paralytic to progress, and told me, word for word, we need someone with a modern mindset. And now, they wanted to talk? I didn't reply. Instead, I did something else. I took the email, printed it, and framed it. Hung it right next to the signed partnership agreement with Stratacor, the logistics giant that had once been Larkan's biggest client, now ours. Because that's what a real closure looks like. Not revenge, not even gloating. Just success so loud, they hear it in their sleep. So, if you're asking me what I learned, that sometimes the best retaliation isn't anger or bitterness or even a lawsuit. It's building something so undeniable that they have no choice but to remember the name they tried to erase. Thomas Blake. Still here, still building, and this time on my terms. 2 years later, my name was on the front page of Forbes. The reluctant visionary, how Thomas Blake built a logistics empire. From the ashes of betrayal. I didn't ask for the spotlight, but when you disrupt an entire industry, when you force the giants to pivot or perish, they notice, and so does everyone else. We had over 300 employees, offices in 5 countries, and a proprietary system that was now the gold standard for predictive inventory analytics. What I built didn't just rival Larkan, it replaced them. They were bleeding clients, stuck in bureaucratic quicksand, scrambling to imitate features we launched 6 months earlier. Their board had changed twice. The CEO who fired me, quietly ousted. The new one, publicly apologetic, privately panicked. Then one day I got a call. A quiet voice on the other end. Someone I hadn't spoken to since the day I was walked out. "Thomas, we're exploring acquisition opportunities. The board believes your company could be a strong strategic fit." I almost laughed. They wanted to buy me? I told them I'd think about it. 2 weeks later, I sent back a counteroffer. A symbolic $1. One condition. They resign. All of them. They declined. I didn't care. Because what they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that this was never about revenge. It was about proving them wrong without saying a word. And I did. Every client we gained, every headline we earned, every late night shift, every sacrifice, every second I doubted myself, it was all worth it. Because in the end, I didn't just survive their betrayal. I thrived because of it. And now, when they hear the name Thomas Blake, they remember exactly what they lost. 6 months after that call, we were awarded Tech Company of the Year by Global Logistics Journal. Not because of a flashy campaign or some billionaire investor behind the curtain. No, we earned it. Through grit, innovation, loyalty, everything Larkan used to stand for before they sold out their soul chasing short-term numbers. I stood on the stage in Berlin holding the award, the lights blinding, the applause deafening. But all I could think about was that tiny, glass-walled conference room where I sat across from Susan Mallory, the CFO who told me I was holding the company back. Funny how the same risk management system she mocked was now licensed by 10 of the top 15 logistics firms in Europe. And the algorithm I was scolded for spending too much time on, it's now taught in graduate business programs. I know because one of the professors reached out to invite me to guest lecture. I declined. I didn't need to teach. The world already learned the lesson. But I wasn't done. Because success alone wasn't the end of the story. I knew the kind of rot that lives in companies like Larcon. Quiet toxicity, shiny branding hiding a crumbling foundation. So I made it my mission to build something better, not just bigger. We created a profit-sharing model from day one. My engineers had equity. Warehouse workers got bonuses. Transparency wasn't a PR stunt, it was our operating system. And when we landed the contract, Larkin spent 14 months bidding on. That was the moment I knew. I'd rewritten the rules. Not just for me. For everyone who's ever been told they're too cautious, too loyal, or not visionary enough. Because the truth is, those aren't flaws, they're strengths. And when combined with conviction, they become a force no boardroom betrayal can stop. Years from now, people won't remember how I was fired. They'll remember what came next. And Larkin? They'll just be a cautionary tale about what happens when you bet against the wrong man. The ripple effect came faster than anyone expected. Larkin's stock, once a darling on the mid-cap tech charts, started slipping. Investors noticed key clients quietly jumping ship, not just one or two, but half a dozen within 3 fiscal quarters. Rumors swirled on finance boards. Analysts began questioning leadership. The press didn't pick it up at first, but then a leaked internal email surfaced. It was from Susan Mallory. In it, she admitted they'd underestimated the reputational damage caused by my departure, though she never mentioned me by name. Just called it a strategic misstep with unintended consequences. Unintended? Sure. But unearned? Not a chance. 3 of their former partners approached me at a Berlin conference later that year, shook my hand, and told me that leaving Larcon was the best decision I'd ever made, even if I hadn't made it myself. One of them laughed and said, "You're the guy who turned getting fired into a business model." I didn't deny it. Because what happened wasn't luck. It was the result of building something with values that couldn't be bought, fired, or replaced. And as for Susan Mallory, I heard she stepped down to pursue personal projects after the board forced a restructure. No press conference, no farewell LinkedIn post, just silence. Meanwhile, I was standing on the TEDx stage in Singapore, talking about resilience, trust, and the power of quiet leadership. My story wasn't just a revenge arc anymore. It became a blueprint for builders, for dreamers, for every overlooked employee who was told they weren't enough. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Being discarded doesn't mean you're broken. Sometimes it means you're just getting started. After the TEDx talk, everything changed. I'd barely stepped off the stage when my inbox began flooding invitations to speak, consult, collaborate. People from across the world wrote to me. Founders, analysts, team leads, even students. Not because I was famous, but because my story hit a nerve. Everyone had felt that sting of being undervalued. Everyone knew what it meant to give your all and be left with nothing. But now they saw something else was possible. A publisher offered me a book deal. I said no at first. I wasn't trying to become some corporate guru. But then I thought, what if I could put everything I'd learned, the betrayal, the rebuilding, the why behind it all, into a guide that others could actually use? So I did. Quiet Exit, Loud Return hit shelves 9 months later. It wasn't a bestseller in the traditional sense, but it got passed around inside companies, quietly. CEOs quoted it in boardrooms without naming me. HR teams whispered about it. A VP at Larcon, he gave it to the new interns, not knowing I'd written it. Meanwhile, the consulting firm I built from that tiny corner office, We landed 3 Fortune 100 clients by the end of our second year. And every deal we made, we did it differently. Transparent contracts, flat hierarchies, real accountability. Some said it couldn't scale, but it did. Because when you build something rooted in truth, it doesn't collapse under pressure. It grows, and sometimes it grows far enough to cast a shadow over the very company that once called you replaceable. Funny how that works. 6 months later, I got a call from a familiar number. It was David, the very same director who had smiled at me during my dismissal, telling me it was just business, that I'd understand one day. His voice was different now, hesitant, almost desperate. "Eli," he said, "we're in trouble." Apparently, Larkane's latest expansion had flopped. They over-leveraged, miscalculated foreign tax structures, and ignored internal warnings, the kind I used to catch early. Profits were tanking. The board was panicking. And in a move I never expected, they wanted to bring me in as a consultant. Not an employee, not a team member. A savior. I paused for a long time before answering. "Send me the numbers," I said. "Let me see what you've buried." What they sent was worse than I imagined: reckless acquisitions, bloated budgets, and morale in freefall. I told them the truth. I could help, but it would come at a cost. And not just financial. They agreed. So I walked back into the company that discarded me, not bitter, not smug, but armed with the clarity they'd never had. I cleaned house, rebuilt what I could, and when it was stable again, I made my final move. I sold my consulting firm, quietly, for a figure no one expected. And just before I left the country for good, I sent a note to David. It said, "Thanks for the early retirement. Sometimes karma doesn't come with fireworks. Sometimes it comes as a quiet knock, right before the whole house collapses." I thought that would be the end of it, a poetic close to a long, bruised chapter. But fate had one last twist. 2 months after I walked away for good, sipping coffee on a terrace in Lisbon with the Atlantic wind brushing my face, I received a letter, a real one, handwritten, from Anna Patel Larkan's former CFO, one of the only executives who never looked me in the eye during my exit. I almost didn't read it, but curiosity, or maybe something deeper, made me open it. The letter was short, no pleasantries. "Eli, you were right. They buried more than you know. I'm sorry." Enclosed was a flash drive. I plugged it into my laptop. What I saw made my chest tighten: spreadsheets, internal memos, whistleblower complaints that had never reached the board. There were falsified earnings, shadow vendors, offshore transfers. Not just incompetence, fraud. Long-term, deliberate, multi-year. And names I recognized: David, Marcus, even the smiling HR manager, who told me I'd land on my feet. I sat there in silence. The man they fired for being too hesitant with money had unknowingly been the only buffer between them and complete collapse. I had two choices: burn it all down, or expose the truth and watch them burn themselves. I chose the second. I passed everything to an investigative journalist I once helped during a pro bono case, someone I trusted. Within weeks, the headlines rolled in. "Major scandal uncovered in Larkin Corporation. Executive fraud spanning over a decade comes to light. Whistleblower report triggers federal investigation." They didn't see it coming. David resigned. Marcus vanished from the public eye. The board issued apologies that read like rehearsed eulogies. And me? I bought a vineyard in Portugal. Not because I wanted to become a winemaker, I don't even drink, but because every evening as the sun drops behind the hills, I walk through the rows of growing vines, soil beneath my feet, and I remember something. They thought they buried me, but really, they planted me. A few weeks after the news exploded, my inbox began to flood. Journalists, former colleagues, even some of the same executives who once dismissed my concerns now pleading for statements, for mercy, for silence. I gave none of them what they wanted, not because I held a grudge, but because they had built their empire on silence and I had spent too many years choking on it. Then came the class action suits. investors banded together. Employees who had been laid off, some unjustly, others suspiciously, now had grounds to demand justice, and they had a face to rally behind. Mine. One morning, I woke up to find a trending hashtag on social media. Illy stood up. It wasn't about heroism, it was about exposure, about consequence. Anna reached out again, this time in person. We met at a quiet cafe in Geneva. Her hands shook as she slid a sealed envelope across the table. Final piece, she whispered. Inside, the internal correspondence between David and Marcus, emails detailing the plan to pin future losses on me. They never intended to let me leave with dignity. I wasn't just collateral, I was their scapegoat. But now, the scapegoat had become the storyteller. A documentary is already in production. Not by me, I refused the lead role. I gave them the story, not my spotlight, because this wasn't about fame. It was about truth and closure. I live quietly now. No headlines, no boardrooms, just soil, sun, and peace. But sometimes I get messages from strangers, from whistleblowers, from people on the edge of a decision. They ask, was it worth it? And I always say, it was never about what I lost. It was about what I refused to let them take. A month after the documentary aired, everything changed. David was forced to resign in disgrace. Marcus disappeared from the public eye, his name now tied to a scandal that investors called the most preventable collapse of the decade. The company's stock plummeted. Government investigations launched. Laws were passed ironically inspired by the very risk protocols I once proposed, and they ignored. People started calling it the Callaway effect. I never asked for revenge, but justice? Justice has a strange way of arriving, not with noise or violence, but with silence and gravity, a kind of quiet reckoning. One day, while walking along the lake near my home, I saw a boy teaching his younger sister how to fish. The simplicity of it hit me. For years, I'd measured my worth in reports, numbers, forecasts. But watching that, I remembered why I cared in the first place. I wanted a future where things were protected, where truth mattered, where doing the right thing didn't make you disposable. That future is still far away, but it's closer than it was. And as for me, I'm not the villain they tried to write. I'm not the hero some people want me to be. I'm just Eli Callaway, the man they tried to silence, and the name they'll never forget. After the fallout, I kept a low profile. Interviews poured in, journalists wanted my side, my story, my face on their primetime segments. I declined most of them, not because I was afraid, but because I knew silence was louder than any headline. Instead, I focused on rebuilding not a company, but something deeper. I started a small foundation with the settlement I finally received after a drawn-out legal battle. We called it the Watchtower Fund, aimed at training young professionals in ethical finance, in spotting the signs of manipulation, in speaking up before it's too late. I started receiving letters, emails too, from people who had been fired for standing up, from interns who felt invisible, from CFOs who saw themselves in my story and finally walked away from toxic boardrooms. That's when I realized what they did to me wasn't just personal, it was systemic. One evening, a former colleague, someone who'd stayed silent during the worst of it, reached out. He simply said, I should have spoken up. I'm sorry. I didn't need revenge anymore. I already had it. Not in their downfall, but in the rise of something better. Legacy isn't about what you build. It's about what you refuse to let die. And after everything they took from me, I found something they could never touch. My name still stands. My story still echoes. And the system that once buried me now fears becoming me. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a finance ethics summit in Boston. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go. Standing in front of hundreds of people, revisiting the pain, the betrayal. It felt like reopening a wound, but something told me it was time. When I walked on stage, I wasn't just another dismissed executive. I was proof. Proof that silence can break, that integrity can outlive disgrace. I told them everything, not just about the betrayal, but about the slow, quiet destruction of trust inside organizations, and how easy it is to sacrifice principle for short-term gain. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was still, like the room was holding its breath. That kind of silence, it meant they heard me. After the talk, a young man approached. He introduced himself as Kevin. Said he'd nearly resigned a month earlier after being asked to fudge numbers in a quarterly report. But he didn't. Because of something he'd read? My story. That's when it hit me. They fired me to silence a voice. Instead, they lit a fuse. Now, everywhere I go, I meet people who say the same thing. I thought I was alone, until I heard what they did to you. They wanted to erase me, but I became the blueprint. And the ones who cast me out, they've started to vanish, quietly. One resignation, one expose, one lawsuit at a time. It turns out, the truth is patient. And karma, she never misses her appointments. 1 year after my termination, I received an anonymous envelope. Inside, a flash drive, a printed spreadsheet with red ink annotations, and a note that simply read, "You were right." I plugged in the drive with trembling hands. What I found wasn't just evidence, it was a blueprint of the rot festering inside the company. Off-the-books accounts, shell contracts, manipulated earnings reports, all signed off by the very executives who'd smeared my name. But what really shook me was this. The file metadata showed edits made just days before I was let go. They'd planned it, used me as a scapegoat to distract from what they were cooking behind the scenes. And M, it could have been Marcus, the quiet compliance officer who always avoided eye contact. Or maybe Michelle from internal audit. Whoever it was, they gave me the match to burn down their lies. I didn't go to the press. I went to the right press. An independent investigative journalist who owed me a favor, owed from a college lecture I once gave, about integrity and pressure in the world of finance. 3 weeks later, the headlines hit. Whistleblower leak exposes $40 million. Fraud in major firm. Top executives under federal investigation following scandal. And there, buried in the article, was a name they hadn't expected. Former executive Robert Hale, ousted last year, is now cooperating with investigators. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need them to say, sorry. I just needed the world to see. And now, they do. The people who built careers on deception are being dismantled by the very thing they tried to bury. The truth. And I walk free, scarred but standing. Because I may have been fired, but I was never defeated. They thought they had buried me, swept me aside like I was nothing, just another name on the payroll, erased without thought or consequence. But what they didn't understand was that I remember everything. Every whisper behind closed doors, every fake smile, every forged signature. They fired me to protect their secrets, but I turned their silence into a weapon. Now the very board that watched me walk out in silence is watching the headlines eat them alive. FBI raids, frozen accounts, public disgrace. And me? I rebuilt quietly with integrity, in a team that actually values the truth. Funny how karma works. Because they took everything from me, only to lose everything themselves. And in the end, I didn't just survive, and I exposed them. And I made damn sure the world would never forget their names. If you think that was intense, trust me, there's more. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss what happened after the headlines. Because some stories don't end, they evolve.